Now that I've unmuted the phone, I can extend a welcome to people online and people here. It's a real pleasure to be opening the first HRI seminar of this year and this decade with a very auspicious guest speaker. We also would like to acknowledge that we're returning here to campus at this time of the year, coming back to Kaitlaitane territory for those of us that have been away. I certainly have been, and it's always good to return to this territory and to UNBC. But also I'm acknowledging that we do have a number of people online who are either going to listen eventually or to be with us as we're speaking now, and just to acknowledge the territories that you're all sitting in and the time and effort that you're making to join us today. We appreciate the fact that there's a lot of people. I've had messages from a number of colleagues that they haven't been able to join today, so I'm anticipating there'll be people that are listening online and otherwise. I'm going to, in a moment, introduce our speaker. But of course, it's necessary for some of you are new to this seminar series, and some of you are repeat offenders, which we love. But this is a neat initiative. The HRI has been running the seminar series in a monthly way now for a few years. It's a collaboration across multiple schools and programs that you can see here at UNBC. And we're really excited about the fact that we're still, having been going for a few years, we're still working through the fabulous talent of health researchers on campus. We haven't covered everybody yet, and we're really excited about what it offers. But we're always open to suggestions. We're also open to suggestions of how we can get the word out more widely. And Bree, who is the HRI admin assistant, is always willing to be receiving suggestions or ideas or feedback. And on the website of the Health Research Institute is where you can see what's coming up. So welcome to those of you that are joining. I know that I can just turn down the volume so that it's not quite as loud when people do join. Now it comes to, I will look ahead for a moment, speaking of the exciting upcoming speakers. It's great that we've got Andrea Gingrich to be presenting next month, and we will encourage you to spread the word and to get people aware of being able to come and attend to these sessions, which are always a real inspiration. So thanks, Andrea, for lining up for next time. But I'm actually going to step away from the podium for a moment because I really want to be face-to-face with our next speaker. Henry is a very special person to me at UNBC because he was my first chair. Officially, he was my first boss here at UNBC. But most importantly, Henry, as well as all the other amazing things that he does that I will touch on, Henry's an extraordinary mentor. And so it's in that spirit that I certainly want to acknowledge him for the way in which he helps to bring up and celebrate and honour the work that other people do, as well as being able to share the insights from the extraordinary work that he does. But there are a lot of other official things that we can say about Henry. Henry Harder is the Donald B. Ricks BC Leadership Chair in Aboriginal Environmental Health. I didn't even have to look at it. But that's a reflection of an array of skills that Henry brings to his work. He, as well as having many skills as a father and a grandfather and other important life dynamics, Henry is also and a husband, I will mention. Henry, as well as being a family man, he has contributed to many lineages of work, and one of those is his contributions to psychology and his very active role in a variety of BC and national institutes, particularly and increasingly in his role in mental health and wellbeing more generally. And the mental health and wellbeing contributions are especially important in relation to the suicide prevention work that Henry has done. That is particularly active in Northern BC, but Henry has a reputation nationally and contributes to Canadian Institutes of Health Research panels as an advisor for multiple groups. In addition, Henry, prior to, and in complement to these works, Henry maintains an amazing network of contributions to groups around family therapy, around advising groups around research ethics, and welcoming people in, advising people around research ethics. And the contribution to research ethics, I think, is something that, for those of you that are not aware, Henry has been really foundational in the strengths that our UNBC Research Ethics Board achieves. And with minimal resources, has been building a culture of research ethics at UNBC in ways that I really appreciate. The other dimension that Henry's work has contributed to is in the broad area of workplace health. So in occupational health and safety and other areas where, again, not just doing that in a technical way or from his perspective on mental wellness, but Henry has contributed to textbooks and mentorship and engagement and training and capacity strengthening that has helped those various communities of scholarship engage more fulsomely in thinking about their ethical conduct and practices, both in their research but also in their practice. So Henry's reach is extraordinary, and I mentioned his role as a mentor to me and others at the beginning, but his role at UNBC has also been extraordinary in terms of his contributions to the School of Health Sciences. He was the founding chair of the School of Health Sciences and has been instrumental in initiating the disability management program and a variety of other innovations in our school that range from our master's programs through to the establishment of our PhD program and also contributing to advising as our school has expanded and grown. So clearly, I could fill up the entire time just talking about the things that Henry's done, and that is only a glimpse. I've been very fortunate to work in the last few years with Henry in relation to a large CIHR team grant that is called the ECHO Network, the Environment Community Health Observatory Network. And that network is across Canada and internationally, and we've been so fortunate, I have been so fortunate, but our team has, for Henry to provide a co-lead role in that project, as importantly, and as we will now hear about, as an Indigenous scholar who has got an extraordinary capacity to enable colleagues to find their way into doing work with Indigenous peoples and involving Indigenous peoples in a meaningful way. But given that our ECHO network is not actually it's largely not involving Indigenous researchers, Henry brings an extraordinary sort of inspiration to how we as non-Indigenous peoples are engaging with our responsibilities in settler territories here and in other parts of the world, and enabling us to find processes that can make that meaningful as we adhere to our own responsibilities as well as in relation to others. So as you can see, Henry's a colleague with whom I hold in utmost respect, and it's really a really great pleasure to welcome him here today to share with us a really important topic. I hope you'll be provoked and inspired. And we will, after Henry's spoken, one of the nice things about these seminar series is there is opportunity for questions. And for those of you online, we will also be monitoring the chat box and giving you an opportunity to ask questions later. So feel part of the conversation even if we can't see you. So with that, I think I have one more slide that I've finished those slides and I just need to close them down and open up. So I'd like us to begin with a round of applause for Dr. Henry Harder.
Thanks, Margot. My overall reaction to that intro is like, God, no wonder I'm always tired. Because one of the features of a lot of the work in Canada is that you're always going to Ottawa or Montreal, as you well know, and others are discovering all the meetings happen there. They seldom come this way. So, thanks for coming. Do we know how many people are online? Or 7? And do you know whether they can hear me okay? Or is that okay?
No one has said anything in the chat box.
Okay. So if you're online and listening and can hear okay, can you just send a chat note to Bree, and then we can adjust if we have to. Okay, great. That's excellent. So I debated long and hard about how to present today, and it's kind of weird how almost everybody sat on one side, and there's still a few on this side. As a psychologist, that's always one of my observations is about human behavior and how we do things, I don't know, sometimes very willfully and other times totally or spontaneous. So Margot mentioned that I'm Indigenous, and I think most of you probably know that. But what I struggled with was how to bring an Indigenous focus to that. So I brought my smudge kit. And I'm not going to smudge because we'll get in trouble. I don't want the HR to get in trouble. But I did smudge this morning, and so there's my smudge pot, sage, my feather, which I have a story about. And then here's my smudge. So I thought, what's the safest possible fire I can bring? So it's a tea can. Ow, damn, it's not very safe. Well, that was my lighter. There's a lot of tradition around smudging, and I'd get shot by elders for using one of these things, like, so Ross, you're well aware of that. Anyhow, so with regards to the feather, one of the traditions with a feather is that the eagle should be giving it to you, like you're supposed to not go out hunt for it, but it should be given as a gift. And I've been hoping for that for like 20 years already. And my wife, Rita, where we've been together for 48 years now almost. So she was out at our place at the lake, and the eagles that we have there gave her not just one, but 2 feathers, which really pissed me off, actually. She likes to walk, and she walks the dogs, and so she was out walking, and one of the eagles flew over, and a feather fell down at her feet. So this is that one, and she's very kindly given me permission to use the feather. So in the smudge, we would wave it to keep the smoke going, but I just bring it as a symbol, and it's also on my slides to remind me that I want to keep this as an Indigenous focus, not stray off into too much academic stuff. And that I purposely went in that direction to talk about how to do or how to be part of Indigenous research from an Indigenous perspective. And one of the things that I find very difficult with academics in particular is that they have such a hard time getting out of their heads. Like they're so analytical, they're thinking so much that they can't take time to experience anything. And it's really important that we take that time to experience that. So for me, Margot mentioned the Clé-Lé-Téné and that we're on Clé-Lé-Téné territory. That's a very important thought for me. It's an important reference to remember that. And that part of the Clé-Lé territory is the confluence, the junction of the Chaco and the Fraser rivers, and Clé-Lé-Téné Memorial Park is right there. So this is a very significant part of the world because there's been people here fishing and hunting and trading probably for as long as there's been people. So this is a very historical place. So how do I change this? Just by hitting so I just wanted to again acknowledge the Clé-Lé-Téné people. The name means some version of junction of the rivers where the 2 rivers come together. So it's an important historical marker. And so the first bullet I have out there is actually about where we are historically. So what does that mean to live here and to be part of this territory? For me personally, and this presentation is going to be all about me, right? So I can't help but relate this through my own experience and what I've learned over the years. But I treat Clé-Lé-Téné Memorial Park sort of as one of my go-to places because of the history there, because of the people that have been there, because I feel like I hear the elders that have gone before me when I'm at the park. It's just a really kind of spiritual place for me. And I encourage people to go there and to be part of the park, just to spend time in the park and feel and think about how long people have been coming to this part of the world. I mean, I don't know about you guys, but when almost 20 years ago, when we decided to move to Prince George, our relatives and friends thought we were insane. Like, why the hell would anybody want to move to Prince George? Well, Prince George is a pretty special place. And it's not about the mills and it's not about the forest sector. I mean, that's all part of it. But what makes it special is how long people have been working and living and praying and experiencing each other here. And then it's always been a coming together of people. It's not been just one group that's been here. It's been a very magical place from that kind of a perspective. There's a lot of other issues too. I don't want to get into that. It's not part of my talk. But, and including how, like if Darlene McIntosh were here, she'd talk about how they clearly have been treated over the years by government, and it hasn't been a good thing. It's been a very difficult place for them, and they still struggle with that. But clearly, this is, for me, is a very important place. It also fits with the reminder for me because we talk a lot about the importance of land-based work. An echo that comes up in other places, and I struggle with what does that mean to be land-based? You know, we talk about that in the work that we're doing, Bianca, like how important it is to be land-based, and the difference between land-based from a agricultural farmer perspective, or land-based from a logger's perspective, a forestry perspective, or land-based from that Indigenous perspective. And in particular with my grandsons, I'm trying to figure out how to impart in a way that they can understand with them the importance of that Indigenous perspective on being land-based. So the importance of land, the importance of what's on the land, the animals, the trees, the foliage, everything else, and how that fits into our own sense of health and who we are, and how that works into various research projects and that kind of thing. And just in terms of that kind of importance and magic, we had 4 moose in our yard yesterday. Right? The most I've ever seen. We had 3, just in my study, and something caught my eye, and I looked out, and there were 3 moose at a birch tree, and they were reaching up to pull the branches down to eat the buds or whatever they eat, the shoots on the birch tree. And I thought, that was pretty special. And then they were moving around, and we have a blue spruce in the front. And I thought, wait a minute, that spruce looks different. So I looked at it closer, and there were 4 legs sticking down inside the spruce. So there was a really little calf in the blue spruce. So it was just amazing. So you sure as hell don't get that in Vancouver, right? So to me, that was a very special and reinforced why we're here, because it makes it much easier, like as an Indigenous person, to make that connection, as anybody to make that connection, as it would in Vancouver. Vancouver, you do, like my aunt and uncle who live there, do a lot of stuff with raccoons, but that's a whole different. So for me, that ties right in with the question of spirituality. Like, where are we at spiritually? And so from my perspective, the Western world is kind of problematic when it comes to spirituality and where we're at spiritually. It's certainly a factor that I know Bianca's worked hard on one particular project with Nadle to look at how we bring spirituality back to community and how that in a meaningful way. And we're still working on that. As part of all the work that we're doing is how do you create that space for spirituality and a spiritual way of approaching things that is not church related, is an Indigenous way of looking at spirituality, not a Catholic way or an Anglican way or any of that kind of stuff. And I'll talk about that a bit more in a little while. And where are we at from a connectivity perspective? Are we connected to each other? And part of what I do is in the mornings is I do a sunrise ceremony. It was a Cree elder of mine actually that I've been working with for a number of years now, who taught me about that and helped me work through that. And it's really easy now because sunrise is at like 9:10 or something like that. So it's a problem because I'm in my office, but I don't want to be there when I do that. But anyhow, but in the summer when sunrise is at 3:30, that's what really tests your commitment to that. And I have to confess I don't always make it. And it was the elder actually who made that okay, because we were in Vancouver and staying at a hotel, and it was raining, but I got up, I went outside because we were going to meet, and I couldn't find him anywhere. And then later on in the meeting, I said, Ed, where were you? He says, hey, what do you mean? It was raining. So like it's okay to skip once in a while. But part of that ceremony is to give thanks. And first of all, to acknowledge, I don't know if you're familiar with that, but you look at the different directions and attribute certain things to different directions where you are, and helps your connectivity with the earth and people around you and the sense of the sun coming and renewing the day and all those sorts of things. Really helps me focus, but also to say thanks. And it was really difficult during the strike to say thanks for the administration, to know that there was people at that end too. And it helps us to acknowledge that humanness that binds us together here, which is often lost when it comes to that like the European Indigenous kind of way of looking at things and perspective. I don't know if you've heard about the grandfather and the 12-year-old granddaughter down in Vancouver just yesterday, right? Who were handcuffed in front of the Bank of Montreal in downtown Vancouver because he was trying to open a bank account for her. So the story goes, I don't know if we've heard all of it yet, but that they used their status cards as ID, and the clerk they were working with did not acknowledge that as proper identification and called the police and accused them of fraud. And the police, rather than talking to them, handcuffed them, led them out of the bank and made them sit in a squad car while they investigated for about an hour. And then they released them. There's profuse apologies because there's nothing wrong. But that was still the state of our connectivity and the whole issue of racism that still is very prevalent in our society. So where are we with that kind of stuff? How are we connecting with each other? And if you're going to do research in community, which a lot of people here want to do, so if you want to go into Indigenous communities, you really have to think about that connectivity and how you're going to connect. It's probably the single most important component. Because if you don't connect, and don't develop trust, you're not going to get any decent work done. Simple as that. It doesn't matter whether you're a qualitative or quantitative researcher, whether you're in there like I go in, we do work primarily with mental health and specifically suicides prevention, or if you're a cancer researcher, if you don't develop the trust, you're not going to get any decent results whatsoever. And finally here, where are we at emotionally? Are we dealing well with things like trauma issues or poverty issues or that kind of stuff, and how we feel about all that kind of stuff? And of course, as a psychologist, I'm always interested in the psychology part of it. How does it affect our behavior with each other? How do we do things together differently than we have in the past? So to me, these are all considerations that we need to keep going in our brains. So a critical part of doing work from an Indigenous perspective is being willing as a researcher to be vulnerable and known to the people that you're working with. So we have something called a location statement. If anybody went to my website, I think there was a click-through that went out with the email. I have a location statement right on my website. Given the wonderful UNBC access to our own information, it's about 4 or 5 years out of date. I can't go in and fix it. So, but it's still there. It talks about my own experience, my own background, the fact that I was abused as a kid by my stepdad, and all the things that are a part of who I am, and how I've explored and tried to find the stronger roots to the Indigenous side of my life. So that's a big part of that location statement. It just helps people tell where I fit. Really important ingredient within Indigenous communities. They want to know how you fit. Tina experienced that, right? When you went out in the community, and it's like everybody sits around in a circle and says, like, well, yeah, I'm, my uncle, my aunt, my grandfather, and they contextualize and place each other within that. And do you mind if I share that story, Tina? No. So Tina was in one of the communities, and I know she was new to this kind of work and feeling a little bit, how do I do this? And I said to her, just talk about who you are. So she introduced herself as being Danish, right? Right. Yeah. I got it right. And then how she'd come come here for love, right? Mm-hmm. And how she'd stayed and all that. And the elders just loved that. They just got to know her. Doesn't matter whether you're Indigenous or not, but you just give them that kind of a story in the context. It's really appreciated. So a lot of the Indigenous journals now, on the research side of it, are requiring the authors to create location statements that are then placed right within the journal. So it's not just your name and your university affiliation, but also a short location statement that places you in there. So Margaret already mentioned some of this. I'm a husband. I'm particularly proud of how long Rita and I have been together and that we still are together. We're facing the next challenge in life, which is retirement coming up soon. And to be quite honest, we haven't got a freaking clue what we're going to do. So we both work full-time and extensive, heavy-duty jobs. So it's kind of like, haven't even talked about it or thought it. No, actually, that's not true. We've talked about it a lot. We have come to no resolution about anything. So I'm a father of 3. Feels weird now because the youngest is 36. I'm a grandfather of 3 boys. Their birthdays are all within the next 6 weeks. So they're going to turn 8, 5, and 2. And it is holy hell when they're over, but it is a lot of fun too. The nice thing about having hearing aids is I can turn them off during that time. So there are some advantages to hearing problems. I'm an uncle, a brother-in-law, a brother, an in-law, a friend, a mentor. There's a lot of roles that I fulfill, and I just, enjoy most of them quite a bit. So my mother was Russian Mennonite, and her family came to Canada post World War II, sort of in the 50, 51 kind of thing. And they were already what many everybody know about Mennonites? The people, I asked Tammy, and she's not here. She was going to fess up to her Mennonite role. Mennonites are a Christian sect. They were reformers of the Reform movement. Like they.
Just going to turn that noise down, so Henry, so you're not getting the.
That should be on, though.
I think that's
according to the bar there.
Yeah.
So they grew out of the Reformation, and they, in particular, objected to adult or infant baptism and believed in adult baptism. So a confession of faith group. They were also very conservative in terms of behavior, still are to a large extent. But one of the reasons I wanted to mention and why this came up, other than the fact that it's half of my background, is that from an epistemological, I can't even say the bloody word, epistemological perspective, in epistemology, in order for you to believe something from somebody, you have to give that person credibility. And sometimes that's by role, sometimes that's by personality. So in the Catholic Church, there's a hierarchy of people, and so that they're supposed to be trustworthy and knowledgeable and authoritative. And so you listen to the bishop, or you listen to the cardinal, or you listen to the pope, or whatever. And so you get that leadership, that direction. In the Mennonite Church, there's no such thing. Until about the 70s, there was no clergy. They were just people from the church that held sermons on Sundays and stuff like that. And I know about this personally because in the 1970s, I was ordained. I was the youngest elder ever ordained into the Mennonite Church. It was a mistake, but it happened. So they have this tradition of anybody being able to get up and speak. And unlike the Amish, so I don't know if you know about, like the Amish sit and they listen like this, and then at the end of the talk, they discuss. And some elders step out and they discuss amongst themselves. And if they agree that it was a good, worthwhile talk, they come back into the group and say, okay, you can believe what that person said, or you should listen to what they said. So there's a credibility check. But with Mennonites, there isn't. So anybody can get up and talk. So on one Sunday you can get this view, and another Sunday you can get a different view, and you have to sort through that. So it's a difficult thing from that knowledge base. Like, how do you acquire knowledge as a kid when you get different kinds of perspectives on things? So there's the Mennonite Church as one part of it. There's all kinds of, the Mennonites think of themselves as ethnic groups. So if you're a Russian Mennonite, which is why it's there, like that's a certain group of Mennonites. There's also Swiss Mennonites who went mostly to the States. That's Swiss Mennonite. Yeah. So and that brings certain connotations. If you're a Mennonite, go, oh, Swiss Mennonite, okay, so there's that kind of stuff. So I grew up Mennonite. I did not grow up Indigenous. And I grew up in an urban setting, which if you're Russian Mennonite and urban, you're already halfway to hell. Okay? Like the only good job as a Russian Mennonite was to be a farmer. And there's all kinds of stories about people who were not very good farmers, but who still decided to stay and be farmers, even though their families were starving and that kind of stuff. And my family was not, because they were shopkeepers. And they had been shopkeepers in Russia and then in Germany. And they were hoping to maintain that in Vancouver. It didn't work out that way, but they did not go to the farm. Anyhow, so my father was, I'm assuming, I've never met him, First Nations, but he'd have to be pretty damn old if he was still alive. And the closest I've been able to trace it is somewhere towards Burns Lake, probably either past Burns, it's like to Gitxsan territory or with Wet'suwet'en territory, that kind of thing. But that's pretty iffy. So there's been all kinds of questions about that, never been able to figure out. This is in my location statement, but all I know, like all my mom ever told me was that he was Indian in her terminology, and that he was from the Wolf, so Wolf clan. And that's all I've been able to find out. My mom's best friend at her funeral, at my mom's funeral, said to me, well, you know why your middle name is George? And I go, no idea. I said, my stepdad once said that they'd had a thing about king, so I was Henry and then George because that was royal names and stuff. It's kind of interesting from a German perspective, but anyhow. So so it's Henry George, and she says, well, George was your father's, like your biological father's name. So that's the closest I ever got to that. More about that in a few minutes, but anyhow, so I'm also a clinical psychologist. So anybody that knows about the practice of psychology, clinical means something within that practice. I first went and became a marriage and family therapist, and which psychology looks down on, like this kind of thing. Then I became a counseling psychologist, which they also looked down on. And then eventually I became a clinical psychologist because I wanted to work in psychology specifically, and worked for a number of years in Delta as the suicide prevention person for Delta Mental Health. So that was where I got the whole youth suicide stuff started. And I hesitate to tell you how long ago that was, but that was sort of like early 80s, basically. So I've been at this a long time. And I used to say I'm an Indigenous researcher, and then I was listening to that somewhere else, and I thought, yeah, actually, that's kind of colonial, isn't it? So now I'd say I'm a researcher who happens to be Indigenous. So I don't want people to go, oh, yeah, he's Indigenous, so we got to, because somebody said to me, actually, I got a grant, right? And the person turned around and said, well, we know you only got that grant because you're frickin' Indian, right? So I kind of thought, oh, okay, screw you, but anyway. So I'm trying to make myself think this way now. I'm also a professor of health sciences and psychology, which I've been doing for quite a while now. And the little schematic actually blocks the word that just is read off in the presentation, and this is, I'm old. The word old is underneath it. So there should be a way of getting that. You can move it like your finger, yeah. Oops. Maybe not, we'll just leave it. Okay, so, and the reason I put that up there is just to let you know, I've been at this a long time. So you've sort of seen everything and been around the tree a few times. So very little surprises me, but I've also seen a lot of good stuff and a lot of good people, which encourages me. So this is that perspective of looking back over a lot of experience and a lot of time. And it makes it's different, it's a different perspective on things. And then the last bullet here, I really kind of struggled with a little bit, because what I really wanted to put was cynical privilege, which ties right into the old part, right? But despite being half Indigenous and despite all this stuff, I still have a privileged male position. Society has not changed that. It's simply by virtue of being male and looking white. And I have a number of stories about that. And I'll just tell one. I was with a group of research assistants, and we were driving out to Burns, I think it was, might have been Smithers or Hazelton, I can't remember. I don't think you were in that one. And we stopped for lunch in a little coffee shop on the way, and we waited and waited and waited, and nobody served us, and other people were getting served. So I'm not very tolerant of that. So I got up and I said, what the hell? And the server said to me, well, if you want to be served, you shouldn't sit with them. And they were all very obviously Indigenous, or the Indigenous stereotypical perspective. And I said, what do you mean? He said, well, don't sit with those people. We'll get to them when we get to them. And it was one of my first experiences of that more overt racism. It was really kind of a kick in the head kind of thing. But it also reminded me that I by virtue of how I look, I can pass. And a friend of mine was here a number of years ago. She works down in Kamloops with Reserve there. And she's talked about how, and she's also half and half, and she talked about how it's possible for her to pass, and how it's tempting sometimes to just ignore the Indigenous part of you and just enjoy the privilege, So you got to guard against that. You got to be aware of that. So I put this in just as a reminder to me that that's still the position with regards to university, anybody, everywhere. By the way, if you want to ask a question, feel free to jump in. So what I'm not is, very clearly, I'm not a spokesperson for any Indigenous nation or group. This is all my stuff, my opinion and stuff, unless I say differently. So who are you, right? How do you fit in from this perspective? How would you identify yourself? Right? So how do you answer that question? Who are you? I always want to play the who when I ask this question, but that's goes into the old category. Even though they did have the theme songs for CSI, right? But then that also timestamps me. So anybody brave enough to comment on this? Ross?
Depends on the context that I'm in.
Mm-hmm.
Where I'm sitting here now, I'd probably introduce myself as a member of the First Nation Studies faculty. If I was in an Indigenous community, if I was with family, that's not how I would start.
Mm-hmm.
As far as its meaning.
Yeah.
Yeah. So to me, it's not that the person changes, but what I might stress in any given situation vary.
Mm-hmm. I agree. It's very different. Yeah. So, most Indigenous communities don't care about your appointment here.
Exactly.
Anybody else? I'm not going to push it. I just thought I'd give it a chance. So just a second here on this topic about labels. And it comes up all the time. You go, I don't know what to say. Is it Aboriginal now, or is it Indigenous, or what is it? So this is my current snapshot of what's going on. It's probably changed by the time I finish talking here. But with regards to the Canadian Constitution, it had the word Indian. That's how it was originally constructed. And then it was morphed to First Nations. And within the constitutional context, First Nations is only applied to people with status. So I hope you all know what status is. I don't want to have to explain all that. But that is the reality here. Then they also acknowledge Métis people. And Métis people, as one Métis person told me, it's not a catch-all term. It's a very specifically defined term. So if you fit that category, you're in there. And the Inuit. And that alone is a problem because there's not just Inuit to the far north. So there are issues within this. But this is the current state. Then the government decided that the correct term for all these groups was Aboriginal. And you'll find that word used all over the place. In official documentation. I saw it in a call today for a grant application. So it's still there. From a more recent perspective, a lot of that's changing to Indigenous. And people are switching out, taking out Aboriginal, putting in Indigenous. So the Institute for Aboriginal People's Health has become the Institute for Indigenous People's Health and that kind of thing, thinking it's more inclusive, less pejorative. But I think it's like any other word that over time, depending on how it's used, it'll become just as pejorative as the previous word. So it's a bit of an issue for us right now. And as one of my elders that I worked with for 16 years now said to me, hey, I'm just Indian. It was good enough for my mom, it's good enough for me, so forget all this crap, right? So it's just, you got to know the context, and that's what the last bullet here is. You need to know how people want to be referred to. So if you're going to go out and work within a community, if you're going to go out and do research, care enough about what they think to learn about how they want to be referred to. So I think that's a really important component to that. And it could be they want to be, Wet'suwet'en, or they want to be more like right down to their local community as opposed to a broader influence. Okay, so in terms of how to do research, how to work forward, these are the three topics I want to spend a bit of time on. Everybody remembers these from their philosophy class or religion class or whatever it was. I'm terrible at this stuff. Every time I do a talk on this, I have to go and look them up again to remind me what the difference is between them. So in terms of epistemology, this is our theory of knowledge. So how do you know things? This is probably the most challenging one. It's one I deal with all the time. I have to think about this. Initially in this slide, I only had the books and the person with the telescope or camera or whatever is on the top. And then I thought, well, that's stupid. Like, why would I pick that one? Because it's all predicated on standing on knowledge expressed in books. Oh, Indigenous people didn't have books, so how does that make any sense? So I selected the one below, which is expressing more the oral tradition of passing knowledge and understanding down. So it's really important that we think about where our knowledge comes from. How do you know what you know? Or how do you know what you think you know? Right? And to me, this is where the Mennonite stuff comes in, the European context, all these kind of things. And my statement to you would be that most people here at the university, most people in Canada, their knowledge, their epistemology is related to the church. So it's either the Catholic Church or the Church of England primarily. There's others, like, and there are all kinds of different groups. But that's how we kind of have thought about it. That's where knowledge has been, and we defined everything based on what the church has been teaching. That's why the residential schools were church-run, because the understanding how the church functioned was used within the government crisis centers and that kind of stuff, so that people would think the same way. So we think about stuff and we analyze. We consider whether it's true or not based on our own understanding, and our own understanding is influenced by what we learned through church, Sunday school, parents talking about it, that kind of stuff. So I think this is still true. I think it's less than it used to be, but I think it's still very much prevalent. So this is a problem, because people don't even understand how screwed up their thinking is, because it's always been there and it's always been the same way. So they've never challenged their own epistemology. They've never thought about how they acquired knowledge. So if you want to go work in an Indigenous community, you can't do that. Right? You have to be willing to look at a different epistemology, a different way of knowing. So Indigenous people, we talk about the Indigenous ways of knowing and how it's different from the Western ways. And most of our knowledge is Western. It's Western European, which is also Christian. So very little from Islam. And what we have brought up from Islam, which is a lot of the medicine, we pretend like it never happened, that it was always an original Christian thought, even though it came out of like the Arab countries and that kind of stuff. So anyhow, this is one of the problems, is that you need to get out of your own epistemology, and you need to think about how that affects what you think. So how do we know what, I got other examples too, but just take one. How do you know what constitutes knowledge? Like, what's important to know? This isn't easy. This is hard thinking. You got to work this out, right? And people who come from foreign countries like New Zealand, they have a particularly hard time with this kind of stuff. Because there's little nuances all over the place in terms of what's right and what's wrong and that kind of stuff. Or Australia, which has this interground kind of the penal colonies and the transportation issues and all those kind of things that have affected how they interpret and learn and all that kind of stuff. And I learned more about that because I have a son-in-law now who's from Australia. So I like hearing about him, and his parents are still there, and that kind of stuff has been very different. Does this make sense? So anybody taking time to think about how you, when someone says to you something, you go, yeah, I agree with that, or I don't agree with that. Where does that come from? Like your ability to make that judgment. So one of the key factors here is how do you differentiate from what people could refer to in writing in this context as that justified belief. So it's still a belief. We're not talking about facts here. So, but it's a justified belief. So this in the church, this is the priest or the minister or someone saying something. You go, yeah, okay, I believe that. So that's a justified belief, and the justification comes from a person of authority with apparently knowledge and wisdom talking about that and telling you about that. So this is my stepdad who hated the Beatles. Right? He absolutely hated the Beatles because John Lennon said that the Beatles are more popular than Jesus Christ. Well, my stepdad was a religious nut, so that just he went crazy. But every time the song Yesterday came on the radio, he cranked it up and he loved it. So as a teen, I bugged him about that, and I said, that's the Beatles. He goes, nope, that's not the Beatles. So he adjusted his filter to deny that to fit his construction of what he thought. And so people do that all the time. So what is an opinion as opposed to this belief? So the opinion is what you hold. And we have a master opinion maker just down in the U.S., so who has opinions about everything, whether there's facts attached to them or not. So we have this great example, tells at the border right now, about the kind of things that I'm talking about here. So how do you do that? Like, how do you know whether what you believe is something that you actually need to hold, or whether that's just sort of developed over the years and you haven't ever made a conscious choice about whether what you believe or what you think is true and what isn't true. So in terms of the next one is ontology. So this is basically the nature of being, like what do we believe about existence and reality and that kind of stuff. And there's all kinds of religious ontologies about how you come to understand that God exists and God doesn't exist, or Jesus is God's son or isn't God's son. There's all kinds of stuff about this. So this is the main focus of a lot of theological seminary studies, which I confess I went to when I was much younger. So this is a big part of that, and that whole field of philosophical metaphysics. So what do you believe in? How do you make meaning out of this kind of stuff? And this is part of what we struggle with in Indigenous cultures. At least I struggle with it. Bianca, I don't know whether you have any thoughts on. I know you have thoughts on this. Whether you want to say anything is what I'm saying. So the problem with residential schools here was they were religious schools. So they were primarily Catholic schools in this area. There were some Anglican ones as well. I don't think there were any others. Ross, do you know if there were any other, like Anglican and Catholic for the residential schools?
Yeah, there was Methodist and Presbyterian
Okay.
at one time.
All right.
United Church, well, they became the United.
Yeah. So these are all groups that with a certain perspective on a deity, right? And so you would use the term God. And I find that when I go work in community, that with a carrier in this area is primarily Catholic. So it's like, how do you talk about this and spirituality without using the term God that then implies a certain perspective on a deity? So we try to use the word creator, that kind of thing to help with that. But it is problematic about how you do that. And then the other thing that I want to start about myself is when I started in this work, I was meeting with a group of elders downtown in what used to be the Days Inn, and we had a really good day. We had a good discussion, and then at the end, they wanted to sing a song to close the day. I thought, great, that's super. And they said they were going to sing a carrier hymn, and I thought, this is fantastic. I'm going to hear a carrier hymn. So they started singing, and they sang Ave Maria. And I'm sitting there going, just totally Catholic, totally from that perspective, but it's meaningful to them. So I don't have a solution to this. I struggle with this constantly because we'll have an elder we've asked to open with a prayer, and out will come a very specific Catholic prayer with the sign of the cross and everything. And I'm like, wait a minute, I didn't ask for that. I asked for, but it's just one of the realities that we're kind of struggling with and dealing with. But it's important, figuring out what we believe and how we believe it and all that kind of is an important part of who we are. And so you also need to do that and to see what you bring to them when you're working with them and what kind of biases or perspectives that might lead you to have when you're doing that. Did you want to add anything?
I think one of the biggest challenges regarding that is, as a researcher, is like where do you fit in? How do you do it correctly without hurting anyone?
Yeah.
That is my biggest.
That is a huge struggle.
It is.
And I was, again, I don't know if it was all elders, but there were elders in the group. It was a very large group, and this issue came up, and I can't remember exactly why it came up, but the whole residential school stuff had been the topic, and then the church role in that and everything else, and they still wanted to do what I consider to be an inappropriate religious closing to the day. And then I went up to one of the elders and I said, how can you do this? Like, you were in residential school, you had all these things happen to you, and yet you're still part of the Catholic Church. And she said, God didn't do that to me. Right? So her God was still God to her. The church was like she wasn't as keen on the church all the time, but for giving honor to God, she was still very much willing to do that and be part of that. Now, it drives me personally insane, but it's, if that's what it is, that's what it is. Are you raising your hand, or are you just...
The late Dr. Joseph Couture explained it to me this way, which really helped me. He had been a former Oblate priest. He was a highly respected healer and elder in 18. But there's a difference between churchianity and Christianity.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's exactly what the elder was saying.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll tell my students, I'll kick the church all day long, 24/7, but I don't disrespect the teachings of Christ. They're two different things.
Mm-hmm.
One's a human organization with all its flaws.
Well, my mom actually helped me with that too. She was very religious, which is a long story there. Anyhow, after I left the church, I was struggling with that, and she thought she was being helpful. She said to me, "Well, you know, Henry, that it's just a bunch of people that get together." And there was a click in my brain that went, "Well, if that's the case, I don't need them." You know, it's the same kind of thing. It's the church and the way the church practices and does things that I have a particular problem. I'm not ambivalent about the church. I'm anti-church in a big way. So I got to keep sitting on that when I'm working with the community. Okay, so the third area here is axiology. And so this is just values. What kind of values do you hold, and how do you develop values? And axiology looks at two kinds. In particular, one is ethics, which, as Margot mentioned, is a big interest of mine, and aesthetics. So initially, I always just talked about the ethics part of it, but I thought, well, aesthetics, you know, which is sort of the beauty and harmony and that kind of stuff in nature kind of plays in here big too, so we need to consider both of those aspects. So these are the three areas I encourage you to spend some time dwelling on. Oh, sorry, Ross, were you?
No.
So then when you think of research, and I have a quote for you here, from a very famous prime minister of ours, when talking about research, said, "A proof is a proof. What kind of a proof? It's a proof. A proof is a proof. And when you have a good proof, it's because it's proven." Okay? So that was Jean Chrétien. Right? And I love that because it's so bizarre. But I think a lot of people have no idea what they mean when they talk about research, and so it's just this confusing. And then Werner von Braun, who was part of the space program in Germany in World War II and then became part of NASA afterwards, said, research is what I'm doing when I don't know what I'm doing. So just sort of different perspectives on research. So what is it? How do you define it? And what is your baseline? So we tend to talk about quantitative and qualitative as the two big delineations, and you're kind of forced to think of yourself as one or the other. And then mixed methods is kind of coming along and giving people a chance to think of both. But I've seen more screwed up mixed methods approaches than pretty much any other kind of approach. But we certainly are trying to figure out still how to do the best research, how to get the best information that we can get. So just think about it, like, what is your baseline? What do you consider research? Like, one of the things that drives me nuts are the media stories. So you see them on TV or you read them in the paper, online now too, but you know, about how such and such a study showed this. And then I always go back to my undergrad first methods course where they said, you know, correlation does not equal causation, right? And yet almost every story is a correlation thing, and they're implying a causation thing. And I've been harping on this for decades. So our son, who still lives with us, was watching news with me, and they said something about a study, and I got on my soapbox. He says, "Dad, I know," and then he repeated it back to me. And he's a mechanical tech. He's not a researcher, not at the university. I thought, my job is done. You know? So the how people understand what is research and what isn't research, I think, is a very critical component to that. And with Indigenous communities, they will say things like, "Don't come and tell us how to do research. We've been doing research forever." And what they mean by that is looking at their environment, looking at how things work, analyzing that, and coming up with better ways of doing things. So, and that's going to be different contexts. So that's a really important component of this. But you need to know how you define research and what you consider to be appropriate, valuable research. It's a really critical component of helping you through this whole process, whether you're going to do Indigenous-based research or not. So from a Western perspective, this is sort of that traditional model. It's formalized curiosity. In fact, when I was in grad school, you weren't allowed to have any kind of ideas about what you wanted to do. You know, somebody else had to say something, and you had to go, "Oh yeah, that's kind of interesting." So that was that formalized curiosity. It was not just a whim. It was, you know, like a bit more formal than that, but it's curiosity-based research. And it's primarily individually driven. I mean, this is as a result of much of it being done through the academy, and the academy is primarily an individualist organization. And then the question about does it benefit anybody doesn't really come up too often. So who benefits and what are the benefits? Now I'm overgeneralizing. This has been changing. On the eastern side, it's more of the yin-yang. This is, again, an overstatement, but there tends to be more balanced approach to research within universities in the east, and it tends to be more practically focused. So we're starting to move more towards an Indigenous base. Right? And then what the Indigenous community, what Indigenous research add is the care and the respect for the community, so that you have to think about where you're doing research and who you're doing it with. So in terms of the research design from a traditional perspective, theory development is a big part of Western-based research. So you have a research question that somebody's come up with. You have your hypotheses. So I'm seeing less as an external examiner on thesis and stuff. I'm seeing less and less hypotheses, which also drives me nuts, because if you don't have any hypotheses, what were you doing? And how, as an evaluator, can I determine whether you got to where you wanted to get to? I find it very crazy making, actually. And even within the qualitative, there are research questions that you're trying to answer. This is not just for the hell of it. There are reasons for doing this kind of stuff. But then traditionally we did sampling. So this is all about, you don't do your population, you have to come up with a sample, it has to be a representative sample, and you have to come up, there's all kinds of statistical techniques for doing that, and there's all kinds of these things going on. Then you have to decide what best answers your question. So you have research measurement instruments that go out and test people, and then those are validated. So there's a whole industry that's built around this kind of stuff. And then some people will willingly go through ethics. Most people have to be kind of forced through an ethics approval process, but there is an ethics review that ensures that primarily that we're not harming anybody. It doesn't speak to the value of the research, but it speaks to whether anybody's going to be harmed by engaging in the research. So then there's data collection. You have to do it a certain way, data entry, data analysis, all these kind of stuff that employ RA at the university in particular. Then there's reporting and dissemination. But in the Aboriginal community, it's all of this stuff community-driven and community-owned. So this is community-owned and community-driven are the two, I don't know what to call them, kind of like everybody's talking about this kind of stuff right now. And researchers have a big problem with the community-owned component of this. Because the fear is, well, if the community owns it, they might deny my ability to publish this or to use the information. And there's a fear about that. I've never encountered that to any great extent, but I've seen it happen elsewhere. And the fact that it's community-driven, I have lots of experience with that. And I have to tell you, it can be very frustrating when the community says, no, that all sounds good, Henry, but we don't want to do that. We want to do this, right? And you're like, oh, shit, there goes 6 months worth of work down the toilet. So there are those kind of frustrations in this, but it has to be community-driven, and it has to be community-owned. They get to decide what happens to the information. And to me, that doesn't matter whether it's like qualitative, like what we're doing primarily, or whether it's a strictly experimental study for cancer research, in a community. These principles apply to both. The resources, I won't go through each of these, but these are the three people that I consider kind of core in this world. All three of these writers are in our library, so you can look them up and read the books. These are all books, but excellent. I don't know what happens to the presentation, Bree. Is it going to be circulated or?
It's online on the Institute website.
Okay, so you can look up those authors and get them out of the library if you'd like. I would say I would lend you the books, but I've never gotten them back from the last people I lended them to, so I'm down myself on that. So in terms of the Indigenous research paradigm, how do my methods help to build respectful relationships between the topic I'm studying and myself as a researcher? So how am I building these connections? So it's not just myself, but how do I take that into community as well? So I have to think about how what I'm planning on doing fits within these things I've just articulated. So how do I build respectful relationships between myself and the other research participants? You notice the term here, other research participants, not subjects or patients. Right? I guess specifically, I think about SPORE that wants to talk about the impact of research on community and people. and won't move away from the term patient. It drives me insane. But there is no worse group of not doing this than physicians in the medical community. They're horrendous when it comes to it. So, and how do I relate to those participants? And so that we form a team, and how we work together to go towards information and what we do with that information. So how will we share this? How will we use it? What will we do with the information? What's my role to build relationships? What's my responsibility? I've had lots of researchers tell me, not my business. Once I have my data, I don't care. You know? And what they're really saying, I'm reading between the lines here, but I kind of, those of you who know me know I need to get a cuss word in there somewhere. But, you know, like to me, what they're saying is that they don't give a shit, right? Once they've got their data, they've got what they needed, and they're out. And that's a big, big problem. The communities have experienced this a lot, and they are suspicious of that, and we need to address that. They don't trust researchers, mainly for this kind of reason. So once I've made commitments and said things to the community, am I living up to those promises I've made? And how do I make sure that I do? And if I bring other people in, how do I make sure that they do as well, so that we continue to build on that relationships? And also, how do I give that information not only to like my partner here, Carrier Secondary Family Services? How does Carrier Secondary then also give that to the Gitsan or to farther east? You know, like how do we spread this information around? And to use the term here, to all my relations, to all of the other Indigenous communities. And that's been difficult because there's always a sense of ownership once you've done all this work, and you don't want to just give it away, and you're worried how people will use it. So it kind of stays an ongoing issue. And what am I giving back? I have an example I'm going to talk about in a minute about how we can use the CIHR term, and others, how we're going to use the KT, the knowledge translation, in a way that's meaningful to people. So I'm going to talk for a minute about epistemic violence in particular, just to say that's a result of colonialism. This basically is the position that the UK, England took with all of their colonies. People had to become English to a large extent, though you could never really become English. I was reading about Meghan Markle today about what their struggles are in terms of how the royalists in the UK will not accept her into the inner sanctum, you know, for a number of reasons. And I thought that's also what happened in India and other colonial countries who went a lot further along to trying to become English than the Indigenous people in Canada did. So this is still a big factor. One of the things that happens when you're in this kind of a position is that local knowledge, which is one of the things that we're trying to identify all the time. Sorry, Bianca, I keep looking at you thinking we're working on this stuff because we're actively working together on this stuff. So how do you get local knowledge heard? Right? Because usually if it's an epistemic violence perspective, that local knowledge is being dismissed. Like, we don't care what goes on in Notley, you know, or whatever. We don't care what goes on in Cycus, or it doesn't matter what they think because we know what's right. So this is a particular issue with the medical community because they know what's right. They know how to treat people, you know, that kind of stuff. So that's been experienced quite a bit. I was part of a group through CIHR where the Institute for Cancer and whatever they're called wanted to do some research with Indigenous communities, and we were consulted on that. And they came into this meeting saying, we've got money, we want to go into your community. And the community said, no. And they go, what do you mean, no? We have money, we're going to cut, no. And the elder from that community said, we have other more pressing issues that we want dealt with first before your research comes into play here. And the cancer researchers just couldn't get that through their heads. I mean, they had money. That was what they kept saying, we have money, we can do this, right? The community said, we don't care. So how do you work with that if that happens, right? And one of my issues here in particular is that Western knowledge is privileged within our context. And it's not even that we're seeing this as more and more Islam, and Islam knowledge becomes part of Canada. We're seeing the same thing happening there, where that knowledge is kind of dismissed and the Western knowledge is privileged over that knowledge as well. Or in BC with the Chinese community, like anything out of that Eastern kind of perspective is dismissed and not listened to. And we're poorer for that. So in terms of things like hearing and not hearing and hearing. So epistemic violence, that perspective, damages the group's ability to speak and to be heard. So it's often in Canada, especially, it's discriminatory based on social identity. So you're not heard if you're Indigenous, like you're dismissed. Like if you're in a group and you look Indigenous and you put up your hand, you may not even be acknowledged to be allowed to speak. Or if you're allowed to speak, you're not paid any attention to. Again, I was part of a using CIHR group because they're not here to defend themselves, but anyhow, and a lot of what they do is not defensible, in my opinion. But we were in a large group that, I don't know how many of you know the history of CIHR, but there for a while there they were going away, and they got rid of all the institutes, and then they were going to bring the institutes back, and they had a big meeting in Toronto about what should come back, and they had pulled all the Indigenous people into one group, and we were told to go away in the corner there and talk about what we wanted. And the first thing that happened is they put a non-Indigenous person in charge of our group. So that took like an hour to deal with before we got to anything else. And then we picked a spokesperson to talk to the group, and they brought us back into a large group. And the leader said, you know, I want to hear from people. So our person got up, and she spoke very eloquently, made her points really well. And he just turned away from her and said, okay, who's next? Didn't acknowledge her, didn't say, well, that was good, nothing, just totally ignored what she had to say. So those are some very real kind of things that, and when we talked about that later on, about what do you do about that when you see that kind of stuff? So anyhow, this harms people as knowledge holders. So if you can never get your knowledge heard, how does that feel? You know, what do you do about that? So we have failed communication. An audience may be disadvantaged one way or the other. They either don't hear, or they can't hear, or they're not willing to hear, or they're incapable of hearing, or any of those kind of things, because they have their own perspectives up and nothing can get through them. These are some very real issues, and we're trying to communicate with each other. In terms of silencing, I'm sure you've all experienced this. So sometimes the audience just dismisses the speaker out of hand. See this a lot in politics, where they like, oh, that's a conservative, I'm not even going to listen to what they have to say, or you know, or that kind of thing. As one example, but there's lesser examples of that too, where somebody who's, well, that's an undergrad, so why would I listen to an undergrad? You know, this kind of, so people are automatically dismissed because they're part of a stereotypical group, and sometimes that's totally, we're not aware of what we're doing. It's just ingrained in us, and we're just sort of dismissing somebody's thoughts because we haven't considered them to be valuable to listen to. So in that case, the speaker is dismissed. There's the other kind, where a speaker, like me, I'm aware that the people in the audience don't want to listen to me. So then what do I do about that, and how do I get heard in that? Maybe because it's a risky topic. You know, you can see what's happening at a lot of the university campuses where somebody is invited to speak and then somebody else objects to it. And so there's a big debate about academic freedom on campus right now, about what is okay and what isn't okay. And then presentations are canceled or heckled or whatever. So again, this is a form of epistemic violence. So how do we actually have discussions and debates if we can't talk to each other? And the result is, if I'm the speaker and I know you're hostile towards me, I might choose not to speak at all. So then I'm silenced and no one gets to hear my standpoint. So what can you do? Well, you can commit to epistemic modesty. This means trust and equality, to have that as your core value, a core foundation. You need to accept that your and all knowledge is limited. Like my stepdad could never, ever do that. I mean, I'm sure everybody has someone like that in their life. If you don't, you're lucky. But he always knew everything and was right about everything. There was no possibility of him ever making an error. Even in subjects he knew absolutely nothing about. So we need to think about that and to consider that. How do we interact with each other around those kinds of issues? And we need to be open to the things that we have not heard before. So we need to think about health in particular, or research from other perspectives. And then a really strong temptation quite often is to just to hear, but then to immediately translate that into how you think. So you go, well, I know what you mean by that, and you put your own understanding over top of what the speaker is saying. And you really haven't learned much in that perspective. You just sort of smothered that with your own understanding. So we need to examine our worldview. Just some things I threw up here. Like, where does your definition of family come from? So most people have, I know it's changing, but there's the nuclear family notions all through psychology. And so mom and dad and 2 kids, right? A nuclear family, that's the foundational family. So you have psychologists going into Indigenous communities, doing family capacity assessment and apprehending all the kids because the kids were being parented by the grandparents. So that's not okay because it's mom and dad and 2 kids. That's what we want. So we have a travesty, like multiple examples of this throughout BC, some of them not very far away from here. All the kids in the community were taken out because, well, there's a communal understanding of parenting within the Indigenous communities that isn't there in the Western way of looking at things. How do you define community? Who belongs to a community? You know, what's important in a community, and how do people leave or join or express values or lead or show direction or something like that in a community? I picked mental health here because it's my area, but it's also one that gets talked about more and more often. There's more concerns about mental health. There's how do we function, like suicide is part of that, but that's simply the end result of not dealing with appropriate mental health or mental illness concerns and issues. So what do we know about mental health? You know, people were apprehended in communities because they failed their Western-based standardized measures of personality or behavior, and so they were yanked or they were hospitalized or something like that. So how do we do that in a respectful way? And I've been struggling with that because people will ask me, well, then you come in and do assessments because you're Indigenous, you understand that. And I go, well, but the law requires you do one of these and one of those and one of those. And I said, I can't do those. They don't make any sense in this community. And they go, well, then we don't want you. We'll get somebody else to do it. And they fly somebody up from Vancouver who pops in, does the assessment and leaves. And they can never go back to the community because they'd be killed if they went back to the community. So there's that kind of interaction that goes on to this day in BC. And then I already talked about spirituality. What is your understanding of that? How does it fit in? And I also put work and where it fits. I've noticed this more and more where people, because I work primarily on reserve, is like this notion of what constitutes employment or, what that value that's attached to having a job as opposed to just being present on reserve or maybe being the hunter or being something else. So struggling with the meaning and the value you would attach to that work notion, I think is an important component as well. So what constitutes the individual? I was trained in psychology where the individual is everything. Like there only is individual approaches to things. There is no group, there is no family, there is nothing. It's just the individual. So if you have that kind of mentality, how do you interact with a community where everything is community? The individual really doesn't exist. Expert authority. If you're with Suwitton right now, do you respect the RCMP after what happened? Actually, almost exactly a year ago, when the RCMP tore down the barricade and were very militaristic and everything else. So how do you deal with authority in your life? Things like mental distress. If someone is distressed, how do you cope with that? How does the community respond to that? And then lastly, how do you define a good life? Right? What does a good life mean to you? And how do you define that? And I think it's a lot of us, it's a very difficult question to answer. So I did I give a lot of thought to this. So here's my good life. Right? So this is out at our place at the lake. If I heard the dog, there's one dog, there should be another one there somewhere. But I couldn't do this without the other part of a good life because I have disabilities and I can't shovel snow. So Rita's out there and dug out the whole bloody fire pit just so I could sit by the fire. And not only the fire pit, but she had to dig a path down and around and so. And she's still working her way there. So to me, this is the good life, having that partner with me, having this out at the lake, being part of the nature when we're sitting there. There's nobody around in the wintertime. We love it out there because we're the only ones that ever go out. So this is part of the good life. And the grandsons have certainly been teaching me other parts of the good life, along with some not so good parts. So what do you need to know? At the risk of harping on some stuff, you need to know, if you're going to do research in community, you need to know and understand what is meant by historical trauma. Not just token knowledge of it, but you really need to get into that and understand what is meant by people, or what people in residential school experienced, what people in Indian hospitals experienced, and what that means today. It hasn't gone away. It's still very present. And my argument would be it's not historical. Like for the people who have come through it, they are thinking of what happened in the past. But the trauma continues to this day. The trauma hasn't left. Just like I still carry around the abuse I suffered as a kid. I'm 66 years old. I still have nightmares about that. It isn't gone. Right? So people who went through residential school, that is not gone. And the communities who supported them and been part of this, the trauma is still there. You need to be aware of that, and you need to accept that. And then we need to move on from that. You can't say it doesn't exist. Or like my family did at one point and says, just get over it already. Enough is enough. Right? So it's not that simple. What about Bianca? Yeah.
Another thing that's always that should be added to a lot of the programs, the Indian day school, which is also Indian day school, which I went to, and there's experienced a lot of physical and mental and sexual abuse, and so it's another part of our history now.
Yeah.
And it's new. It's a new topic, and it should be added to a lot of them.
Well, I'm going to recommend this, but there's a online program called SANYAS that the Public Health BC and others put together. It's a 5-part tutorial kind of, you watch something and you answer questions. And it does a basic kind of orientation towards all of the aspects of First Nations history in BC, including residential school, hospitals, all that kind of stuff. And I did it. I wanted to see what was there, and I found it quite useful. But it is a primer, sort of like introductory level. But at least it does that. So I'd recommend that for everybody to do, just so you have that fundamental basic knowledge. And it provides you with some resources as well if you want to read the more in-depth stuff. So, yeah, so that's a good point. I guess. I know, it's in everything. So politics, be aware of what's going on. If you don't know what's going on with the Wet'suwet'en right now, find out, be curious, learn about it. You need to know what's going on in the communities. Because you never know. You might get a research project that involves the Wet'suwet'en. Well, you need to know what's going on there, and you need to understand the difference between traditional elders like that and elected officials, and what that means in a community, and how that plays itself out, and how that can get in the way of your research. You need to understand about the electoral system. My God, it drives me insane. Like every 2 years, a new freaking government. So you just negotiated everything with one group, they get and they don't get reelected. Now you got to start all over with somebody else. That's some of the realities of the research. And some of the communities have gone to every 3 years or something like that. So it's not quite every 2, but it's still a very regular replacement. And quite often, if the chief and council are replaced, they then change every position on reserve. So everybody you've been working with in mental health and everything is I've got a new leader in there, and it's new different. Yeah. So these are some of the realities. And I think just be aware of everybody's, despite talking about historical trauma and stuff, everybody has their own personal journey with regards to these issues. And you need to care enough to learn about those personal journeys. So, and then I already mentioned specifics, but that's to learn about what's going on in the community that you're hoping to work with. Learn about the issues that are there. That doesn't mean you interfere in them, you just need to know about them. So again, I'll go quickly through this because I know I'm running out of time, but if you don't know about residential schools, find out. There's lots of information. All you got to do is type residential schools into your Google search engine, like 10,000 articles come up. So there's lots of information about that. Less people know about Indian hospitals, so there are some resources about that. It's also very disgusting history in terms of how Indigenous people were experimented on within the hospitals. It's sort of very Nazi-ish from that perspective, and the testing and stuff that was done, including lungs being removed from people, like one lung being removed to see how they would function on another lung. Those sorts of very grotesque experiments that happened, all because people were supposedly had TB, so they were taken out of community and the Indigenous communities were separated from the white communities, and then they basically stayed there their whole lives. So learn about that, learn about what the consequences of all these things are today, how they still play out today, and how people feel about these things. And my last bullet here is just simply understand that it still exists and accept that it exists and have compassion for that. Nobody expects you to be able to go out there and change anything. So saying something like, I wish I could change that, is enough crap to save your breath, right? It's like, what do you do for people? Like, how do you help them now? And they'll let you know if you take the time to find out. Just a quick thought about culture and language. The main things here are that there's a pile of languages. And even in something that the researcher or stats can would put as one language group, probably has 37 and a half different dialects in it. Right? So it's very difficult at times. We work primarily with 11 carrier communities. And in those 11, when we were doing some of the written material, there was never, ever agreement on how a word was spelled, because it's an oral language, or exactly what the word meant. So there's all this stuff, everybody has their own interpretation and a dialect that goes along with that. So sometimes those were nice, friendly discussions, other times not so much. So there is that problem as well. There are 188 distinct First Nations. There's 30 languages with 60 dialects. These are all stats can kind of numbers, so grain of salt. And when it comes to cultural activities, like I joked about the lighter thing, because I've been with elders that will only accept matches. Right? It has to be the wooden match. I don't know if you can still buy them. One of these Eddie wooden matches, because that's the proper way to light your smudge, because it's traditional. I'm like, traditional? Where the hell did the match come from? So there's issues with that, but that's been built into their understanding of how the ceremony works, and the ceremony is important, so I don't mess with that. But I'm pretty sure if I came out with my blowtorch to light something, they wouldn't be very happy. But I don't claim to be culturally accurate. Because I could never meet all 100 and whatever cultures. It's just never going to happen. So again, just some background stuff. This is a reference to the Indian Act. You've all heard about the Indian Act. Did you know it was passed in 1867 and has largely stayed that same way since? So name me another piece of legislation that affects people that hasn't been updated since the 1860s. So there's been a few little changes to it, a lot of changes around status and women's status with regards to marriage and that kind of stuff. But they're relatively minor. So the Indian Act does everything. I mean, it established reserves, it defines what status is, who pays what kind of taxes. Everything related to a First Nations person's life is affected by the Indian Act. And people don't understand that. They just say, well, why don't you just leave the reserve? Well, there's consequences to leaving the reserve, which are defined by the Indian Act. There's, changes to your status. Like, what does that mean, and how does that impact you and your kids potentially, and that kind of stuff. So people need to know about the Indian Act and the impact of the Indian Act. And then there's the whole question of when the government says, we're going to eliminate the Indian Act, people who for years have been screaming for it to be eliminated all of a sudden go like, wait a minute, maybe we shouldn't eliminate all of it, because there may be some parts that actually are useful to people. So be aware of that. It's a very complicated issue. When you're asking about people's personal journey, be curious but respectful. People generally are willing to talk, but it takes a little while to get there, and you have to have that trust relationship. Be interested in them. Don't be dismissive. I think a lot of researchers come in, I know, I took a class on residential school, so I don't need to know anything more about that kind. Or I did some class on something else. So you don't know what that person has been through, or what they have concluded, or what they're thinking of the stuff. Be willing to share about yourself. Be honest and open. Like, don't take 5 hours to talk about yourself, but be willing to share that so they can get to know you and figure out who you are and whether they want to be in a relationship with you. Be respectful, be compassionate, engage as a human to human rather than as a researcher to Indian. Right? And so maybe that's the editor that took the word Indian out of there. I don't know. But, it's like you want that kind of engagement. We're equals. Like, we have different roles, but we're equals. So we want to work together in that context. Yeah.
I think one of the biggest things as a researcher that I've learned is specifically with elders, you have to be so patient.
Well, the other colleague that you and I work with, his name shall not be mentioned right now, this is something that he and I have worked on, because I think I've changed quite a bit in this context. Because when I first started working in the community, I was very much calendar driven and hourly driven, agenda driven, you know, and actually Tina learned about this too, like, you know, how unimportant the agenda is in one way, right? So that, because the communities are not agenda driven, though they want to have an agenda. It's a, you know, there's a bit of a conflict in all that stuff. And I've really relaxed about that stuff. But the cost is you got to allow like half a day for a consult, not an hour for a consult, just in case. Right? So to me, that's very much part of that, and that's part of that respectful approach. I think, like the approach, the worldview is different on this stuff. Okay, so just be specific, be current, know what's going on. I was going to use the Wet'suwet'en example, but I already used that. So just think about that. You need to know what's going on in the community. So where to from here? I like to use this example of a trip. I don't think how much time I've got left. Probably not much. No, 1 minute. That's not great. So think about if you're going to a foreign country that you've never been to, you don't speak the language, how would you prepare? I think most people would maybe take a language course, or at least get a tape to listen to the language, or figure out key phrases. They might learn a bit about specific cultural practices, that kind of stuff. Even the business guys that travel to foreign countries have coaches that come in and coach them on how to say hello and how to do proper greetings and that kind of stuff, so they don't offend anybody. So consider that. Like if you're going into a First Nations community and you've never been in one before, maybe you want to learn about something before you go. Right? Protocol is a big issue. You don't want to offend people by not knowing the protocol. How do you find out about the protocol and all sorts of things? So you prepare, you learn as much as you can, and you prepare yourself. So like, how do I prepare to sit? I mean, first potlatch I went to, I've been warned, like it can go 5-6 hours. 8 hours later, we're still there, right? And you can't leave. So there's, you know, there's sort of protocol kinds of things that you have to have. I don't know how you prepare yourself for that, like sit a lot on a bench, I don't know, and toughen up the backside, right? It's a difficult thing. But it is their protocol, it is how things are done. And be open to new experiences. Be, you know, like eat some food, local food that's prepared. Be willing to try those kinds of things. Learn while you're there. Really pay attention to what's going on. Most of you are good at that. I mean, people who come through universities, so they're good at observing and paying attention. So just use those skills that you have. And then be a good visitor. Like everything that goes along with being a good visitor, be a good visitor. So I'm going to go through, like I'll just point you at the TRC. If you haven't read at least the, what's it called, the summary, or the first part where they have the recommendations. Was it the summary, Ross? Do you remember that?
Calls to action?
Yeah, well, there's the calls to action, but there's the big multi-volume full report, and then there's a condensed report that has the calls to action in it. But that's not all that's in it. I guess it's like a summary, Cole's notes kind of report. It has some information from the consultations and all that kind of stuff. Anyhow, so at least have a look at that. These links are all live if you can get that, so that you can look at them and find it, take you right to them. There were 94 calls to action. I pulled out a few here because these were relevant to me. They need some interpretation sometimes, because here we talk about Aboriginal professionals working in the healthcare field, and we're interpreting that also to include academia. So we need more Aboriginal, Indigenous academics. We need more people working in the academies, researchers, all those kind of things. Right? Then there was the medical and nursing schools to have students take a course dealing with Aboriginal health issues. This has been interpreted by universities to include everybody. So the university is struggling with trying to get an Aboriginal 101 course, or like Ross, you may know more about that than me right now. I think we still don't have anything that really does that. So I know
you know health sciences historically?
Yeah, but I designed one for psychology and health sciences that went beyond the old one, and they've never offered it.
No, but health sciences has to take First Nation studies one.
Yeah, but they were talking about a specific course.
Oh, for health.
Yeah.
Yes, that never came about.
Yeah, so anyhow, the idea here is to provide information to everybody so that they have that basic foundational information. Is nursing doing that? Because they were specifically, yeah, okay. This one I like, change the information kit for newcomers to Canada, but I don't think I should stop with newcomers. I think every one of us should get a kit that just reminds us about what the reality is and that kind of thing. Why should it only be newcomers? Because many people are entirely newcomers to this file, this agenda. They also want to change the oath of citizenship, and the first thing that I always react to is the Queen Elizabeth II. I'm not a royalist, so it really bugs me. But they have including the treaties with Indigenous peoples and fulfill my duties as a Canadian citizen. Most people do not comprehend that treaties are legal documents. These are signed in good faith. They are the law. We don't really have a choice about whether we honor the treaties, but for some reason, we, including government, treat the treaties as being different than other laws, and they get violated and they get mucked with all the time. So we need to understand that those treaties are, in fact, the law, and that we need to honor that law. So here's the Sanya's program. You don't have to do all 5. You can do 1 or 2 or 3 or as many as you want. And then I did give a brief view of the first research we did of what's possible from this perspective. So the first thing was this was a youth suicide prevention 5-year grant. And I know these are fuzzy, but my point of putting these up, this was our advisory council. So if you want to count how many are on there, I think it was about 25 or 26 people. So just imagine you're bringing this council together on a regular basis and what that's like. I know Bianca and Tina know very well what that's like, from experience. But this is a commitment that you make, is that you are going to consult, you are going to listen, you are going to act on what people say. And it's bad enough having these, but then you get an alternate being appointed and they want to know everything that's already happened, and so you got to repeat everything. So this is a part of navigating this landscape. It's a very cumbersome, but it's also really rewarding when people really start to connect with it and appreciate what's going on. In this grant, we identified the 8 values. They call them the carrier values, but they're fairly universal. But these were the 8 that came out of this study, and we're now on our 3rd study. So we did youth, then we did young adults, and now we're doing seniors or elders or whatever. We had this big debate about what it should be called, and these values are staying consistent in each one of those programs. And training, there were typical facilitators manual, participant handbook, camps. It was the camps that really made a difference. And our first camp was a winter camp. We went out to Utsa Lake. Temperature was minus 37. We had boys and girls there in cabins. And after that week, we probably said we'd never do that again. So, because adolescents don't seem to notice what the temperature is. So we had to route them out of all kinds of different places in the middle of the night, including boys out ice fishing in their pajamas and barefoot at minus 37. So that was a real entertaining experience, not something I expected to have to do as a researcher, So this is a call out to the REB too. Like we did trapping. We had elders, hunters come and show the kids how to set traps. We did hunting. It took some doing to get a hunting experience through the REB, like with a real gun, and really killing something and all that kind of stuff. And not all the parents agreed to that. So if you look closely here, you can see a snare. I just picked this as one example. This is the kind of conditions we were in. So they were out heading into the bush to check a snare here. But we also had some bizarre experiences. We hired a traditional hunter to take them out on a hunt for deer, for venison. And on the way to where we were, he shot a deer at the side of the road and then came in and took the kids back. So that was not very traditional. And then when he got back to the part where the deer was supposed to be, it wasn't there. So he had to make sure it was dead. It had crawled way back into the bush. So he went back in after it and then dragged it out with his truck. So we had some issues as well. It's like, not traditional doesn't mean the same thing to everybody. And when you think about that, what would traditional hunting look like? I mean, does it have to go back to bow and arrow to be traditional? And he had a brand new hunting rifle. So the boys were just all over. They just wanted to see the rifle. They couldn't care about anything else. So we learned some lessons here too. But this elder here, this hunter, is about to process the rabbit. So they watched it get skinned, they watched it get cut up, all that kind of stuff. So these were the themes that came out of this research. You can read about it. We've written about it. There's published articles about it. But this was a two-stage process, and so these were the themes. Now, one of the problems I have here is that CIHR always wants standardized instruments. So we had them here. We had them in the project Tina was involved in with the young adults, and we have them in the elders. So we changed them a little bit. And I have a real issue with this because I'm wondering if it's even ethical to do that with this population because of how poorly these measure certain populations, including indigenous populations. But CIHR insists that you have to have standardized measurements. So that's why the guy on the question mark, I don't quite know. Now, the results for us were all good. All the instruments we had, everything trended in the right direction, as long as you ignore how poorly these were administered, right? Because there's also administration issues with them. KT, we did a sports day in Burns Lake, and I picked this as a volleyball tournament, but the wall in the back, immediately after this, we put posters of the research on the wall, and people could come in, and we had RAs standing at the posters, and they could read that. I did my talk in the feast that we had, and we had around 400 people at the feast who listened to my talk, which never would have happened in it, like going to CPA or any other conferences. You get maybe 15, 20 people, so it was quite an interesting experience. And I had some really interesting, fun conversations with some chiefs afterwards, so it was great. This was the research team at the time. And getting to humbleness, this is just those other slides repeated, but commit to these things. And I added in here the health, prosperity, and success, like how do you define those? What do you know about that? And then one of my favorite quotes, if we knew what we were doing, it would not be called research, would it? So, and if research hasn't changed you as a person, then you haven't done it right. Now, one of the things I said was it's impossible to do research from an unbiased perspective. So I just wanted to circle back to that. I believe that if you do what I've outlined here, you will be biased. You can't help but be biased. You're going to think of what's best for the community. You're going to think about what's best for the people in the community. How are you going to interpret that information? So I'm suggesting that you need to spend time learning what your bias is. You need to be able to articulate your bias and be very clear about that so people understand where you're coming from. You need to be willing to change that bias. But really, you just need to get on with it. You make your statement. You get this out in the open. It doesn't stop you from doing the work, right? You just declared who you are, how you fit in, what you think, how you believe. Now get on with it. Do the research. But be prepared to be changed. And then we get back to Sean Wilson. I really believe this. If research hasn't changed you as a person, then you haven't done it right. I'll stop with that.
Well, thank you very much, Henry. One of the luxuries of the time zone of this, we're aware that people will be some people will be heading off, but there is time for questions, and it's a really neat opportunity to follow up on the many things that Henry has outlined. I've got plenty of queries, but I'm going to open it up to people as we begin. Any elements or thoughts or comments or queries or things you'd like to follow up with Henry?
Oh, come on, somebody else.
I can say a comment. The point you made in one of the slides about resist the urge to kind of organize what you hear into your own framework of understanding, that was a huge issue. I don't want to say issue, but that's, I think, really fundamental, because as researchers, you're often trained to do that, to gather information, sort information. And in this context, I think you have to be willing to let things sit in kind of an unknown area to percolate for a while. Yeah, so I really appreciate that statement.
I'm just going to also add, if anybody's got any questions online, you could maybe type them in and into the chat box, and Bree will pop something into the chat box now so you can see where that is.
I want to get back to your comment and that. Those of you who don't know, Tina came into our research project as a non-Indigenous, non-qualitative researcher, and then had a pretty steep learning curve and did a fantastic job in that learning curve. But one of the things was that how do you do that? Like, how do you take information, or the way you've been trained, for example, to run a meeting, and then take that and have to figure out how to change that, how do you morph that in a respectful way, for example. So, I mean, you were able to do that, but that speaks a lot about who you are and where you're coming from. So, I know that's tough, it's very difficult. And I've been at this a long time, but I'll still do that. I'll be in a hurry and I'll forget where I am, and it's like, okay, let's get down to it. And then usually some elders set me straight.
Rachel's got a query here.
Might be some of an answer, but I'm just curious at what point you decided to shift your identity away from white male. Or what inspired you? Because a lot of the talk today makes me question, do I really have a story? Do I really have that place?
Multi-whiskey,
but what inspired you to shift your position? Working in this research or community?
Well, I mean, I don't know where to start, Rachel. It's like become aware. I mean, Ross was part of this. He was great. Really helped me with a lot of this because I was struggling with my identity and how to figure this out. And Harry, when he was alive, Harry Schwann also was helping me with that. And struggling with do I or don't I? Even acknowledge that side. And it was just, over time it came to that realization that I did want to acknowledge that. And then when you do that, then it's like, you're not alone. So what's the impact of that on Rita and on the kids and all that kind of stuff? And that was my biggest fear, actually, was how, like, when I decided I wanted to be identified or self-identified as Indigenous, like, it wasn't part of the deal. And Rita said, I don't care. You're who you are. And my kids, who I went to, very nervous, they said, you're our dad. Who cares? Mm-hmm. Right? So it was very gratifying, and it opened the door. But there's still times for me where it'd be easier here just to sit here and not let anybody know. You know, including that I've been serving on various boards, including the psychology board that you alluded to, where I was sitting next to somebody at one of the meetings, made some disparaging remark about the Indigenous community. They weren't willing to help themselves and stuff like that. As a psychologist, couldn't figure out how to work with them because they were all this and they were all that. Couldn't sit down. I couldn't stand it. So I did respond to her, and maybe not in the most politic way, but I ended up being the chair of the Indigenous Issues Task Force for the college now. But the college at least is moving on doing something so that people understand. So I don't know. I got to think about that some more. It's been an ongoing process. It didn't just go like that. Yes.
Kind of an open-ended question. You touched a little bit on the within with the unfolding events about a year ago with the military stylish action on the barricade, and then I think it's Friday tomorrow. There's another court juncture where they've served an eviction notice to, I think it's Coastal GasLink or whatever project's in there. What role do you feel research has, if you're, and not to say that there's active research there right now, there might be, but in helping or propagating the rights of a...
I don't know what role it has. It depends on what people are going in there to hope to do. My point simply is that you're going to go work to it. You need to know what's going on there. And to be curious about that and non-judgmental about it. And aside from the whole issue with the gas pipeline and barricades and everything else, to me the biggest issue for the community is this distinction between the elected officials and the hereditary officials. Because I know that's not playing out well in the Wet'suwet'en, right? This internal conflict, and it may actually split the community. So what does that mean if you're going in there with a study of some kind? And maybe you shouldn't go in there with a study. I mean, it's the wrong time to go in. But you need to know that. Be curious about that. Or there's other less.
Oops, sorry, we've got a query online. When you finish it.
I was thinking there's other less contentious stuff. Like we need to know, like Carrier Second Accounting Services has member organizations. Every once in a while, one of those member organizations gets pissed off at the parent organization and threatens to leave. And that causes conflict internally. So if you want to go into that community, for whatever reason, you know there's this conflict going on, and that might impact what you're hoping to do.
There's a question online, and I've got a closing question that will...
Reading one, is there?
Ray, can you read it out?
Yeah, it's a longer one, but many Indigenous people give an introduction at the beginning of a meeting, something that positions them within the socio-political context where they are speaking, including who their parents and grandparents are, often in their own language. Researchers who are outsiders usually are not required to do this, and even if they share about who they are descended from, the community may not know who their relations are. How can researchers provide context about themselves when speaking?
Yeah, I thought I kind of answered that with Tina's example, but just be willing, if you get an opportunity, be willing to share about yourself, like how you came to be here in UNBC, how you come to be a researcher, and what you're hoping to do, and I think you just said like your parents came to Canada at a certain time, and that not a lot of detail, but that kind of an approach so that you have some information for them, because they're right. I mean, they won't know specifics.
Yeah. I think, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I think when I was doing my location statement, I think it's just a different perspective to highlight how you're not an individual. So I think it's kind of trying to look more at that connectivity piece, like how are you connected? How are you responsible to your elders or your ancestors, and paying respect to that kind of relationship? And I think that contrasts to Western perspective, which more celebrates the lone hero kind of perspective. Although I think there's a culture shift there as well. But just kind of saying like these are the people that brought me to where I am today, I think helps create a few bridges in those worldviews.
Ross?
Before I run out the door, thanks, Henry. I would just add something that you were stressing about knowing the history. There's a recent history if you're going into a community. So the stats can, and this is a pet peeve of mine, there are not 180 First Nations in British Columbia. There's 180 First Nations communities.
Mm-hmm.
It's a big difference because it just looks like, like if you're going to work with the Wet'suwet'en, you need to know the history of the last 50 years before tribal council. Like these divisions, if you're going to work with Yakuchi, you better know about Clasden. Because though they may be separate now, the elders, a lot of those elders grew up in one or the other. These divisions, the word First Nations has been a way to separate people. We use it all the time. And we need to know the difference between a community and a First Nation. Because if we just say First Nation, then we divide them into these little groups. When traditionally, the Wet'suwet'en are, right? Through the fee system, the Wet'suwet'en are Pin Tai, Ni Tai Bun. This thing called Wet'suwet'en First Nation, which is really complex, right? Hegogit, Wet'suwet'en, that's the Wet'suwet'en Nation. But StatsCan would have us see them as First Nations, which then makes us think they're separate entities, which then confuses us to know the relationship, is what I would say.
Yeah.
Because it's just a very prevalent discourse now. And I think, knowing that history of 40, 50 years is important, as well as all the stuff. All that other history is extremely important. Thank you.
Green.
Yeah, I have to run. That was great.
Thanks for coming.
Yeah. And if announce allows, I sent something to announce on the Wet'suwet'en issue today. I'm not sure if we're gonna let it through, it might be too political for them, but, if it does come through and you want your name put to a letter of solidarity as a researcher or human being, go for it, we'll put your name on it.
So, Henry, I'm going to finish us off with a final query, just as people are leaving, and it's about tenacity. So I would observe that you probably said about 10 times during your talk, maybe even more, it drives me insane. Which is, I think, a really important issue because it could leave the impression that you're left, becoming insane and feeling frustrated. And clearly that's not the case. I don't think it leaves that impression, to be honest. But what I'd like I'm just wondering if you can offer a couple of closing remarks about, because what I have observed with working with you is your amazing capacity to be frustrated, but then to re-engage and to continue learning in a series of cycles over multiple decades. And I just wonder if you can speak a little bit to that, to some of the things that allow people to look at these challenges and for what they are, potentially feel frustration or whatever other suite of emotions they might need to feel, but to what is it that motivates you to keep re-engaging and to continue the work which you clearly have continued to do over decades?
Well, maybe I went insane a long time ago, I just don't know it. Again, difficult question. I think my expression indicates a level of frustration that you have to be willing to experience. Like when you're working generally with people, whether they're Indigenous or not, or disagreement and misunderstanding, you have to be willing to roll with that. We've had some in Project Travis that you're working with, like it happens. And there are certain structural things within First Nations communities, or Ross's point, within communities that aid in that frustration level. Like there's like I mentioned, the electoral process, things that will not be present in a different kind of community. You be aware of that. But what motivates me is that I don't do my work for me, and I don't do my work for the broader Indigenous community. I do it for the community that I'm working with. And if I can have an impact on that community, I roll with it.